Okay.
So I'll just draw a random object and show you the shadow on that.
I think I was mainly confused for the animals.
So
For the
even
for the object,
animals,
yeah.
okay. So yeah, shadows are shadows, whether it's with animals or with objects, it doesn't really matter. I let me look for some kind of animal that I've done in recent past. So let's say we did that. We did this hippo last week, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
So this hippo, I
Yeah.
here I have made the shadow on the body. I suppose that part is not a problem for you, right? It's the
Yeah.
drop shadow that you're concerned about. Am I right?
Yeah. Yeah, 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 yeah.
All right. So here's what we can do. You make a periphery of the shadow that you want to, or the periphery for the shadow that you want to depict.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can just mark with these regular hatches, just lines,
Mm-hmm.
and make the shadow. Now I'm paying close attention to the distance between the lines because that is going to represent a particular tone of gray. So
Mm-hmm.
imagine this is like a 50% gray.
Mm-hmm.
If I change the lines, that means that the gray is probably becoming deeper or lighter. So what
Mm-hmm.
just one this much is usually enough to at least indicate shadow. But now if I want to show the shadow has got an umbra, a penumbra, so a darker shadow, a lighter shadow,
Mm-hmm.
I can do the exact same thing by changing the angle further, but then again I will keep that angle constant and I will make a line slightly on the inside of that first outline that I had made. Can you see? But I did not draw that
Yeah.
outline because I don't want it to look like two stark spotlights
Yeah.
creating that line. And I can theoretically keep doing this infinitely till I get the dark shade I want. I can keep making these lines closer and closer and closer in more and more angles that I want so that it looks like there is this density of line. See?
Okay. Yeah. I think for me, not that shadow, but so you did with the black watercolor, right? Or was it with the ink?
This
Um, yeah, that shadow is where I mean, I but
this was the ink of our of the pen that I just bled out. Let's
yes.
see what. Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
So so I think my question is when you taught us like hatching and cross hatching,
Mm-hmm.
so wouldn't that apply to something like that? Something like the hippo or like the bull that I drew,
Of
or
course,
the yeah.
you can do that as well.
Okay.
So let me show you that part in hatching.
Yeah, so that's where I didn't find a lot of examples of, I think.
All right. So this becomes slightly more difficult only in the fact that you need to be very comfortable with drawing the basic shape first. So the more ink drawings you do, the more comfortable you start becoming. Right. So this, oh, now if I want to make this hippo, why am I calling him a hippo? He's a rhino. So first, let's just try this casual drawing just of his horn. Now, within the horn itself, there are at least three tones, and the horn is like a cone that is turned around, right? So, this was one shading technique we did. This was contour, remember?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So, I can create this contour shading carefully in one like concentric curls so that it starts looking like a believable dark tone. Then when it comes lower and I start getting some texture, I can either break this up or
Mm-hmm.
I can make a separate area of a lighter tone on one side and a slightly darker tone on the other, and then also something in between, so I can start crossing that over. So this is the kind of shading that would be done on an etching. Now I
Got it.
can further make just the center part darker, because that is where that shadow is going to be cast even deeper. So I do exactly the same thing. And in this, because I'm using this flexible nib, I can also do something like this, where I can press the nib to some amount and add more depth to the color, to the tone. So I'm turning it. This is crosshatch, but the line becomes very dynamic. And it adds more dark ink in certain areas. I can also maybe not press it 100% and get that shade. See? And then
Yeah.
the rest of the places, if you want to add more, you can also do things like stippling,
Mm-hmm.
or you can continue with this line, but you can increase the space between the line. So I can make this separately, but in the same curve as the earlier line. So every 1.5 times the
Uh-huh.
previous lines, I can change this. So you have to approach each area as a different color,
Mm-hmm.
and then you can get this shading done.
Okay. Got it. So it's still okay to do the cross hatching on an animal.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Of course, of course. You can do cross hatching on anything.
Okay.
It all depends on what you want at the end of the day. So
Yeah.
if you want to just make a very fluid artwork with which you're going to color later, or just ink out, then that's
Yeah.
your choice. But this can be also a very, very compelling artwork. I love ink
Got
art, which is full of texture. I'll share some with you if you want.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can,
I think.
um,
Yeah, that would be helpful.
yeah.
Mhm.
All right. Is Madhushri here? Hi, Madhushri.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. So, meet everyone. Archana is from Canada, and her friend Shivani has just joined today. Archana has been with me for almost 3 years now, 4 years. And
Oh,
Malika has joined last month, right? 2 months ago. We
Feb,
started,
Feb, I think. Yeah.
yeah,
No, Jan.
Jan. So,
Yeah.
Malika's in
yeah, same with
Virginia.
me.
She is so she was very eager to start a batch. So while this batch was dormant for almost a year, I thought, okay, one student who's been after me for such a long time, so I'll start it. So now, Madhushi, when you go to Seattle for your holiday, you have no excuse. You can
Yeah,
you
yeah,
can join this batch, huh?
I will.
All right. Okay, so before we begin, I just want to give you a little background about what we're going to do today and why this is such an important but often neglected part of art. So today we'll do doodle art. This is an often requested topic for a different reason, but why I do it infrequently, but I find it important, is also another reason. So while my company is called the Doodle Factory, this is not all that I do. I get a lot of calls for doing for what's termed as doodling, which I absolutely hate. So I keep having to correct people. It's not doodling. That has a different connotation. So I like to call it doodle art. So to define it simply, doodle art is just creating a whole lot of textural art on paper with repeating motifs. Usually just one color, could be any color, and does not involve watercolor and paint as much. But originally, the term doodle was used almost like a sketch. So if you can imagine, even artists like Da Vinci made doodles. But if you think that his doodle looked like a tiny Hello Kitty kind of doodle, that's not how doodles were. They are huge 10-foot papers on which he has doodled the sketch of a fresco that he's probably going to make on a wall. So that too was called a doodle. Any kind of design sketch was also called a doodle. Many people know of this poem, Yankee Doodle. So the Yankee Doodle actually was a macaroni making machine. There is evidence of that little scrap of paper on which it is really Benjamin Franklin or someone who made a design of how to make a macaroni. So that is also a true story based poem. Okay, so now my experience with doodles has been in the time that I had my kids. Over the period, I had my kids 2 years apart, and then I was looking after them for about 5 years, and after that, they were portable enough for me to just get back to art. But my mom insisted that babies need a lot of care, and she thought I was such a art addict that she would have to call me, which she did. You won't believe it. She called me every few days to check, is the baby still alive? You know, you have to feed it once in a while. So she said, don't do any kind of projects that you do. We all know you love it, you get lost in it, but it might be too much of pressure to look after the baby and to do your art as well. So just to keep myself sane, I used to keep a small piece of paper and one pen next to me. So in the time when the baby was in my lap, and then eventually one baby in lap, nursing one, the other one decided she wanted to just hold my foot and sleep. So it was like baby, baby, baby for 5 years. I still maintained a little bit of sanity by continuing to do some kind of art. Yeah, someone had something to add to this? I thought there was someone trying to speak. No problem. What I realized that was that when you have to do art, which has to be just moving your hands, but you do not have the time to either look for a reference image or try to think about what topic is going to be good for you or a purpose for it, or then budget time and anything. How do you do art consistently to practice your line without all these encumbrances? The way I did it was just start making lines on paper. First, you make horizontal lines, then you make vertical lines, then you start making small lines on the diagonal, some rounded lines. Oh, excuse me. Oh, thank you. And then, so there's a whole bunch of things that you can do repeatedly, and that can create some patterns or textures, and that makes all the difference in your practice. So the lines that we make during doodle art are very specific, and they're usually short, but they also are like doing crunches. It's a very small exercise, but the more you do it, the stronger your abs become, or your core becomes. So consider these like crunches for your palm. We often write very small lines, so you will be comfortable making those small lines a certain way, but we have to keep them consistent. So the few things that you have to work on, I'm going to show you. And my hypothesis is that if you do these exercises for at least 10 minutes every day, or 10 minutes whenever you get time for it, you will be building in a kind of muscle control in your hand. So over the years that I have been doing art, almost every day for the past, I guess, 35 years, I can guarantee say, I have inadvertently strengthened my palm to be able to make a line that I can control. So on a piece of paper, if you ask me to draw a dog, I will draw a dog, and the students generally look at that and say, but how can you do it? You must be born talented. There's no such thing. It's just that I have been doing art every day for almost 8 hours a day, definitely for the last 10 years, and at least half of my day for the past 35 years, which is like two lifetimes, two adults' lifetimes. So, I want to give you some tips on how you can strengthen your hand much faster. I hit upon this quite by accident and it worked in my favor. You can do it more consciously and make that work. The aim of the exercise is to think of it as crunches, that you can just do these anytime that you can, and we have to test whether you are able to make a predictable line. So a predictable line is a line which you can make in any direction of any length with any tool and know exactly where it starts, where it's going to end, and what it is doing in your picture. So many times beginners have trepidation only because they are not familiar with their line. So when you are making a line as a beginner, you're just so scared. You look at the paper and you say, "Oh my God, I hope this line goes." And then in that, it's like again cycling. People start cycling really fast. They can't cycle slowly. It's the same thing. People will draw a very fast line and hope that it ends wherever they want it to. It's like Bhagwan Bharose. But that will not happen. The second is the weight you put on the line. Normally, we put a very heavy weight on the line for writing, and we'll end up using that same heavy hand for drawing lines as well. We cannot draw a light line, we can't hold the pencil a certain distance away, so all of that will change also. The third thing that we also have to train is our eye. When you look at a blank piece of paper, you should be able to imagine your illustration on the blank paper. The reason it does not happen right from the beginning is simply because you do not have the experience of seeing your own work on paper. The more work you do on paper, you will see a start which starts with a blank paper and an outcome which will have your art on it. Seeing somebody else's finished artwork, it does not train your eye to learn the process of making art yourself. So no matter how many final pictures you see or see all the world's paintings, you will not be able to train your eye to make the same unless you make that as well. So the fourth thing you will learn is making mistakes. The more mistakes you make, they're out of the way. You will always learn 10 times more when you make a mistake, which again, I don't like to call a mistake, but it's a learning curve. So if you've done something that has caused a problem in your picture, you will have learned a lot more. If your picture is perfect, you are at plateau. Okay, so don't feel bad about that uncomfortable or the discomfort you get from seeing something imperfect in your picture. Your expectations are higher than your ability, and your ability will only come higher if you allow it to climb steeper and steeper and steeper. Right, so the last thing that we will start practicing with this is also understanding distribution of space. So space distribution is very important in composition. While we focus so much on putting something on paper, we must also pay enough cognizance to the fact that paper itself is just a mass of negative space. So when we are drawing something, we are cutting up that negative space. Very often, if we don't cut negative space properly, we do not get a composition that is pleasing to the eye and to the brain. So you will have made a lot of artwork on paper. Sometimes it's very formal, sometimes it's very casual, but when you look at it, you feel something's off. You fill it up with a whole lot of texture and color, everything from edge to edge is painted, but it still does not give you a sense of satisfaction. So negative space gives you balance and relief. So it's a combination of a positive that attracts your attention, a relief that allows you breathing space, and then you have a composition that allows your eye to flow through the pictures through that balance that you have created. Again, this is something that you can study for 1,000 years in other people's paintings, but unless you do your own work, you will not see how some things work and how some things don't work. So even when I do my regular pictures like we did the animals last week, my mind with the given data is already thinking about how to compose the page to make it look pleasant for me. And eventually, the person you have to please is yourself, huh? First you have to be happy, and then if nobody else is happy also, it doesn't matter. So you have to find your point of happiness. Right, so what we'll start off is from the back. We are going to start off with composition first, then move to the textures, and then we are going to check how our hand is going to do those crunches with the exercises. So we have an A4 size paper. If you have a larger paper, just try to look for an 8-inch by 11-inch area in that large paper. We are going to divide it into 12 sections, into 12 rectangles or squares. And these rectangles or squares should be about the same size. They don't necessarily need to be equal, but the gutter space, that's the space between them, must be as close to equal as possible, and it should be a little smaller. So I'm going to show you this, how to make this, and then you can follow after I have done it, because I want to explain how that space division works. So here's how your composition should begin. Now that I've told you we need 12 boxes, you need to start visualizing the box on blank paper. You need to start using your fingers to figure out how big your box should be. Should they be about this big? It's not difficult to do. You don't have to have precise measurements. So if I make a box about this size, I can also hold it with my pen and see if this is working. And maybe here, maybe here. Oh, this might go out of the page, then maybe a little less would do. And I also want to leave about a centimeter on all sides, because that is the initial relief. That is like a courtyard around your house. You don't want the door to your house to be on the street. So this is like the courtyard around your house. So I'm going to start off with making these lines in such a way that I am seeing my paper from the top. If you are not comfortable making vertical lines, and if you're going to turn your book to the side, there's a good chance the line is going to look crooked when you turn your page upright again. So I'm going to recommend, even if your line is a little wobbly, hold your book perpendicular to your not perpendicular, at the same angle, so that you see this horizontal line as a horizontal and not at an angle that we are normally comfortable with while writing. So I'm leaving 1 centimeter from one side, making a line. You can stop at any point and measure and see if this line is going to be sufficient. I think it will be. And then make the vertical line. Again, you can check if this is going to be sufficient. Yes. And finish the square. So let me finish the top and the first rows and column. Now from here it becomes more difficult to see if your lines are parallel to the edges. Are you getting them straight or are they coming crooked? And if you turn the book to the side, then it will become even more difficult to do that. It is absolutely necessary that you do this freehand. If you do it with a scale, you will not have achieved much. Your learning will be a plateau. So you won't believe, even simple things like drawing these two lines up to a point where you can predict that joining them will give you the line that you want, and also without any edges, without any lines going beyond. That is also being able to make a predictable line. So the horizontal is done. I don't know if my squares are the exact size, but can you see the gutter space is looking quite clean? And if I do the same below this, This looks about right. Horizontal gutter space also good, but oops, my bottom rectangle is not as big as the first two. But I don't bring it below this because the frame should look even. So uh, the way the eye looks at spaces and is pleased by what it sees is uniformity in the smaller spaces. It couldn't care two hoots whether these are even or not, honestly speaking. It doesn't have the time for that. But it does try to notice a few things. I'm talking about your brain. And even if you see, so wherever it can see smaller spaces, the assessment is a lot easier. Straighter lines are a lot easier um, to evaluate. So that is why if you make one crooked line, that will stand out. Now look at this. I have made one line just go a little beyond, but I let that, making this line straight, the edge straight, rather than trying to join it to the extended part of the horizontal line, is more important. At every point, you must realize that we are in the business of tricking the brain. We are tricking the brain to experience something. At the very least, experience pleasure or curiosity or inspiration. So it's all a trick because we are making stuff on just a two-dimensional page, and yet it is going to look like something in 3D, and also it is going to create dimension, sometimes even color. Right, so first part done, composition part is taken care of. This is a very regular composition. We don't have to worry about anything else beyond this point. So just this exercise itself, if you can do it, that's fabulous. Now, let's move to making these different patterns. So we need to look at breaking up this space into smaller and smaller and smaller spaces. And we can also, the easy way to do it is just, make some lines and fill it up with some texture. But if you want to really do good exercises for your hands, look at making very precise lines. So I'm going to make the first few lines to divide my square into equal parts. It goes from edge to edge. So you have to be able to see the two edges properly, which means you're going to have to hold your pen a little further than your writing distance. So if you're in the habit of holding your pen here, you will obscure your own path. It's like walking backwards. So hold it a little further so that even if I'm touching the pen over here, I can see where it has to go. It's easier to project that line when you can see the end. It's pretty much like if I give you directions and I tell you, okay, you have to go to, from Pune, you have to go to Bombay, and then you just start walking in any direction. It makes no sense. Even if I tell you, look, you have to go northwest, you can even try to walk there as the crow flies. Then I have further divided those spaces into halves. So now what I've got is 8 parts and 8 very equal looking parts. of a rectangle. Now, had I asked you to do this, had I asked you to draw lines to create equal textures, in more cases, people will start from the top. And the reason for that is because we are conditioned to use paper and making shapes on paper like writing. We start from the top and from the left. Very few people will make lines from right to left. Now we need to create a set of triangles. That's the first texture I'm going to give you. Now, in order to do that, I want to be able to make equal triangles. If I just start making random triangles, how do I know that they're equal or not? Eventually, you will be able to do that. But in the beginning, you can do the same trick that we did for the horizontals. You can make these dots, which will represent the half mark horizontally, then quarters, then eighths. So I have cut up the top line in more or less 8 equal parts. I can see that this is bigger, this is smaller, so I'll make my adjustments as I go along. But don't make extra dots there. And then in the space in between, right below, you will make the dots for the bottom parts of the triangle. So this is how I'm going to draw very controlled lines. And the ab exercise that I'm talking to you about will be in being able to move your hand or your book to draw these very precise lines from end to end, tip to tip, without going out of the or beyond the line that it has to touch, and also going as straight as you can. And if this exercise is making you nervous, do not hold your breath. If you hold your breath, your line is going to wobble. So somehow holding your breath and drawing the line makes the tip of a pen, especially a fine liner like this, work like an ECG would, but for your pulse. So your line wobbles according to your pulse, and it's quite funny. You don't want that. The subsequent lines, you are going to make the triangles without making those dots. So you are going to predict the point that is the exact opposite, a certain distance away. We have deliberately kept this distance less. It's not too far away, it's just about 8 millimeter or so away. So this practice of drawing the literally an 8 mm line from one point to another point. We don't even do something like this. When was the last time you tried to draw a letter which was so precise and so exact? It's just not a requirement anymore. So if you want to draw nice straight lines, every time your paper touches the pen, exhale while you're making the line. Exhale. So through one long exhalation, you can make about 3 or 4 lines. Pause, inhale, and then exhale very consciously. If nothing else, at least this is going to make your lungs very efficient. If this exercise is done well, it's a great exercise for your hand. If it is done fast, this is how it lands up looking. So I'm going to show you a what not to do section of those textures from the other side as well. So here's how you might have made lines. And then you get stuck with a space which is neither too big nor too small, but definitely not like the other. So this is making lines from one side. Unequal. Now, if the texture has to be made, if you start from one side without giving yourself some kind of guide, I have seen a lot of artists finish up their texture like that. So these kind of messy spaces are just untidy, blanks in your lines. When you work very precisely, you will get to see these nice things happen, like every place where the triangles are converging. You see that little bit of ink jump and that darkness that gives the texture some kind of dynamic glow. So this becomes your base texture. The horizontal lines are your grid. Sometimes you draw the grid like this, sometimes you assume the grid and make texture on that. Now let's try making a vertical grid and see what we can make in that. Try making these lines while holding your book horizontal and holding your pen horizontal, and either bending your fingers or dragging your entire hand down. Ideally, this exercise is perfect for a pen and not wet ink, just because you are required sometimes to go over your work much faster than when we do ink illustration. Okay, now in this vertical design, what can we do? We can start making things like maybe a herringbone texture. So start from the corner, give yourself a 45-degree line, and now your task is to just make parallel lines to this 45 degrees. So you have to make sure that your angle does not change. You can move the book to whatever angle you want to try to ensure that that angle is not changing. This can be a very tricky exercise. As you come lower and lower, your line can become flatter, So you have to keep checking that you're not doing that. And then you have to make another set of lines in the opposite direction, and the angle must again be exactly opposite. Only then will you be able to make a successful herringbone design. As I often say, speed is not a virtue in art. So take your time to figure this out so that you can do a decent job of it. Now we can build more textures in this. I'm going to give you a bunch of textures which then You can either fill up over here or make more blogs and practice this on a daily basis. I'm publishing another book on doodle textures. It should be, hopefully, at least a few prototypes should be available by the end of March. Let's see. So here's one texture that I love making. Suppose I give myself a grid further that has more space. Now this becomes a very interesting pattern. There's enough space over here for me to do something more other than just lines. So I can do something like maybe a leaf like this. And because I have created that grid, I can more or less guarantee that my leaves are going to be exactly the same shape. I can work on that, right? So even in doodle art, filling up beyond its capacity is not really the best thing one can do. I used to be under the impression that the more texture you do, the better your artwork looks. So I've spent hours and hours and hours on creating these highly textured drawings, and at the end of it, I'm exhausted and the picture just looks so tired. So it took me a while to come up with a certain balance. You need to have, yes, texture is great, but you need to balance that out with adequate white or dark space. So in this case now, I'm going to fill up the space between the leaves currently with my dip pen, because I hate to use these expensive inks for filling up space. So I'm going to use my dip pen for this and just fill in this negative space with black. And this will give me a great amount of contrast and really let the leaf part stick out. Now, in the past, I would have thought this leaf is so big, I don't like it. I want to make it even more delicate. So I will try and add more and more texture. But you should not add more texture in textures like these, which have a slightly larger motif, until you have finished stuff around it. So if I were to continue this and make a herringbone pattern like this, next to that I have a leaf pattern and herringbone pattern and leaf pattern, you'll notice that the herringbone is so dense that it covers up a lot of space and fulfills the need to enjoy very regular dense texture. And the leaf patterns are then beautifully breaking up that texture. So I can enjoy both. If I fill up the leaf and I have the herringbone, then I won't be able to enjoy anything. I guess this also ties into something like, now I don't know what your experience is, but sometimes at Indian weddings, they give you so much food that you can't enjoy really anything. For years, I would be very upset with that. Then I realized that I have to just walk along the buffet and decide on what I like the most and just pig out on that. But it's so sad that there's so much that is exquisite quality that you really can't enjoy. I suppose the justification for that is it could be a different thing for different people, so that makes a lot of sense. But then the other example I find sometimes is the amount of jewelry that is worn. So everything you have is put. That makes no sense either. So you need gaps, you need some breathing room, breathing space between richness, I would say. I think the corollary I can give you is an all spicy meal. If you don't break that up with something that cleanses the palate, I don't know if that is enjoyable. So now this texture, you will notice that the base texture is not even visible anymore. And this is a great way of filling up space too. So even the coloring bit requires precision. You cannot afford to let the shape of your leaf be compromised. How's everyone doing? I'm moving at a certain pace because I just want to do a lot as always. But don't worry, I will be sharing some textures with you later on so that you can take your time and over the weekend maybe sit and make some more and share the pages, fill it up later on. Alright.
Aditi,
Yeah.
I just want to ask something different.
Yes.
So, while using this ink and pen, right?
Uh-huh.
Why do we need to dilute the ink?
The waterproof ink.
Yeah.
So this ink, the Black Star ink, is a very concentrated ink, and you can dilute it up to 5, 6, 7 times. You can use one dropper full of ink for. I had used it for almost 3 weeks. I just kept adding water to it. The way to test it, one way to test whether there is adequate water or not is to make lines. Keep adding a little bit of water, but measure it. So you add 1:1, 1:2, 1:3, and keep making a fat line or take a brush and make a stroke. And you will see that when the ink is very concentrated, it has a sheen. And then with every dilution, it starts losing the sheen a little bit. And then you come to a point where when you make a mark, the black starts looking a little gray. So you have to dilute it up to just before that point. The reason you put water is to allow flow. So when you dip your ink, your pen in the ink should not just sit on the nib comfortably, but it should also flow on paper. Now, paper has a little bit of an abrasive surface. That's great to make lines with because then whether you're using graphite or pen or whatever, the ink sticks. It won't flow around. But that means that it creates some dryness because of the friction. And if your ink is very thick, then as you draw a line, you will get breaks in the line. So you need to have some kind of flow that as you're making the line, the ink is very happily going and sitting on the ridged edge of the paper and not resisting that dryness. Okay?
Thanks, Aditi.
Okay. All right, let's move on to the next grid. Let's try making a square grid now. So divide the square into 4 parts. Now, mine is not a square, mind you. So if I'm going to make a square grid here, I'm going to have to do a little bit of measuring. And I'm going to have to make the lines from the top to the bottom. And one part of it is probably not going to be a full square. I'm just praying that at least it is a decent half square. Now, since I have a decent half square, I can further divide these into half so that I get many but full squares rather than 3.5 small. So I'll get 7 full squares, which is an odd number, but still they're full, so my texture will not look incomplete. I keep doing this all the time, and I can't tell you how beneficial this little bit of math geometry has worked in literally everything, whether I'm making faces, portraits, animals, patterns, travel illustration. This little bit of understanding spaces goes a long way, and it's not just to make grids. All right, now I'm going to show you how a pattern can develop. So let's look at every square and think about all the stuff that is possible. Suppose we just draw a line running across like a diagonal. So this will look like our triangle from up above, but with a line running through. These should be easy enough to make because you know where the line is starting and you know where it's ending. But the problem can come when your hand isn't steady enough in drawing the line. So again, when you're making a horizontal line, hold the pen vertical. And when you're making a vertical line, hold a pen horizontal. And when that same line is supposed to be on the diagonal, tilt your hand even more or tilt the book so that you can continue the same action of your hand. So my hand is steadily in the same position, in the same place, but I keep changing the angle of the book. And I keep changing my grip. So I just, while the wrist is in the same place, I keep doing this and this and this, and then the book accordingly.
Aditi, can you tell me the bit about horizontal line or show that one time?
Yeah, so when you're drawing a horizontal line, now I'm drawing this line which is a diagonal, but I'm keeping it in such a way that for me it is a horizontal line.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But look at how my pen is. My pen is at the vertical. So my pen is held at an angle which is perpendicular to the line I'm making. In this same orientation of the paper, if I'm making the line adjacent to my horizontal, this is a vertical line, correct? But I'm holding my pen horizontal, so it is effectively perpendicular to the line that I'm making. Just that.
Okay.
It's just a stronger grip, and when you hold it like that, you can see the two ends of the line much better. Like if I hold my pen like this and I'm trying to make my horizontal line, can you see I am obscuring my own path? I can't see where my line is going. So I will easily go and make a mistake. But if I just move it like this, I know my line has to go from here to here. It's easier and more accurate. That's all. It's just a practical issue. All right, now this is one lovely pattern. So the first two columns, we will keep the pattern exactly like that, and you can make one whole section of your design in this if you want. The next two columns, so let's say this is column 1, column 2, in 3 and 4, let's add to this. So now we are in the business of making the design a little more complex. So how about let's make a leaf pattern along the diagonal lines. Okay, so this was how my thought process was working while I had one baby on one lap, the other baby on another lap, both of them just about falling asleep. And I know that if I get up To keep one baby in the crib, the other one will wake up, and then she'll wake the first one up, and then I'll have to do the whole exercise again. So find a way to sit over here. Let your legs and arms get numb with sitting in one place, but your brain does not have to die in the process. So this becomes the second very legitimate texture. Now let's add a third texture to this by adding a double leaf or a double line to the petal and making it even denser. So when you're making that line, you have to consciously make it the same distance apart, or at least they should look like the distance at the thickest point of the leaves is more or less the same. So you get this sense of protrusion.
Aditi, would you be sharing these pictures on the group?
Yeah, and I'll share them with you separately also. But I could add you to this group, Madhushri.
Okay, fine.
तुला मिळेल माझ्यातनं.
Okay, okay, thanks.
So this exercise of making consistent curved lines will make your circles brilliant. The only thing that I can tell you is that you won't even realize when the transformation has happened. One day you will make a design or a drawing, and the lines will just come out so perfect. It will stun you so much that you won't make anything for the next 2-3 weeks, because you will have no clue where that good luck came from. You will have put in the work, but you've not put in the same work as you get results for. So you're so mesmerized and so confused that you think that's the last picture you will ever make in life, and will refrain from any artwork because you feel that you're never going to top that up. My moment had come like that at the age of 13 or something. I made this fantastic copy of an illustration I saw in a magazine. There's a picture of Ram, Lakshman, Sita on their chariot with horses and all. Just extremely ambitious, that project. But it turned out so good, I think I just gave up for 6 months. I said, that's it, that's my magnum opus, I can't top this. All right, now for the next one, you can do something like maybe a corollary of this, or you can do something like this. How about let's try making only half of the curve so it starts looking like a pinwheel. And you can make pinwheels in one direction, and then you can make them in another direction. This also keeps your brain active, because you constantly have to think about what what is the right way, or you're looking at things. So you will develop your own method of talking to yourself. Should I make it upar se, niche se? You'll use your own terminology, and that's perfectly fine. Don't wait for the right terms. To this, we can still add one or two more things. So one thing can be that in the vacant spots, you can add dots. So while on the one hand, we have to find the right balance between the amount of texture and blank space, you can keep pushing that. In this case, again, we could just color the outside edge of that square. See if that works for you. But this is one motif. You need to color the other side as well and see if that makes the whole pattern look different. You will notice a lot of these kinds of designs on tiles. And now you will be able to see those tiles as repeats of motifs and appreciate them very differently. Alright, so we finished 3 different kinds of grids. You have a horizontal grid on which you have made a triangle base pattern. So I want to explain a little bit about how these base patterns can be expanded. You can make any kind of base pattern, like this square was a base pattern. Here you have triangles as a base pattern. And if you want, you can make different textures in this as well. Like one of my favorite textures is to make just one line on the right leaning line. So this almost looks like a piece of paper or a tape that is folded and then pulled out like an accordion. And my intention over here is to keep the line at the same distance in each triangle. Now, since these triangles are reflecting, you have the opportunity to create its corollary on the opposite side. So you have to do a little bit of thinking and say, which side do I have to do this? What if I do it on the other side? Nothing is going to go wrong. You'll just have a different kind of pattern, but you will know from that array, I should have done it on the other side, or whatever it is. Let it be. There's no right or wrong in this. So the joy in this design is trying to keep these lines equidistant. Then you can add more lines to make the texture dense, and these lines must also be the same distance away. So you can make 3 lines or 4 lines as long as you maintain the distance and not just crowd them. Now I like textures like that, but there are certain artists I have seen who will, in an effort to just fill up space, make textures like this. So as you can see, because there is no negative space, all of this just looks like it is going to be one big gray line. What is the point in that then? So you need the white space to balance out. And suppose if you do this very casually, what is the point in doing this also? This texture doesn't even look like a texture. It just looks like, I don't even know what it looks like. So don't be in a rush to finish the texture. All these projects are guaranteed but delayed gratification. So the delay is also important. The gratification comes from doing the job properly. So this becomes one texture. We got one with just the single line, we got one with one set of triangles being filled up, and we get another by filling up the other set of triangles. And this creates a very lovely three-dimensional effect. Almost like fins. Now I'm going to give you one last base texture which does not involve making lines, and this is again between these four you can, I think, make at least 100 textures easily. The next one, for which maybe you might need to draw pencil lines in the beginning, because I don't want to be cruel with you. You can draw a grid with pencil because we don't need this grid in pen at all. It'll interfere with the design. And if you want, you can make a square grid as well, like we made in the third square in the first column. This will give you the space you need, maybe, I'm not sure, to create scallops. And the size of my scallop is half of these tiny squares. This will be one curve. And I wanted to start and finish exactly at the end of the box. So in one square, I managed to make two rounds or two rungs of the scallop. And the squares are merely going to guide me to make the scallops up to the height that I need to make them, and perhaps also guide me to make them in the same size that I need them to be, so that they can look even throughout. As I said, eventually you will not need to make the grid at all. The whole point is to be able to do this on a blank anything. Excuse me, 1 second. So this texture also has tremendous potential. You can fill this up with, again, single lines, making sure that each of those lines in each of the scallops is exactly the same distance away from the outer circle. Then, if you want, you can add more than one line. Then, if you want, you can add a slightly smaller inner line. And then, if you want, you can color that inner line up. But keep your textures clean. Don't, oh, I was not to color this one. Sorry. Anyway. Don't fill it up so much that you can't appreciate it. Now, the other thing you can also do, oh, wait a minute. So, in the last 5 minutes, I just want to tell you a couple of things. When you are doing this whole exercise in creative thinking, what should you do next? How do you think about what I can add to this? Think in terms of the following. So, we are actually speaking about line, right? They are all lines. What kind of lines do we have? So we have thin lines, we have thick lines, we have short, long, straight, curved. So you can use all these definitions of a line and vary them. And then you can get more and more textures. Like in the case of this scallop texture, I could argue that this is a very thin line. So the next line I can make can be thick. So I can see what is the interplay between the thin line and the thick line. I could make the line even thicker and see if that makes a difference. Every little change in your parameters is going to make a difference to your texture. So the thick line on the outside, or even a filled up space on the outside, looks very different than the same made in a thin line. We have made something similar over here with straight lines, but with curved lines it looks completely different. So there are more words that you can use to define what a line is, I'm sure. You can come up with your own definitions as well. And you will be able to just say, how can I vary this? Then you have things like direction. These leaves are pointing upward. If you have another kind of leaf that is pointing downward, then that makes a second texture, or in fact the same texture in opposite lines would be pointing in the opposite direction. Then you have things like points, or you have a scallop shape like that, but you can also change that to a pointed arch maybe. How does that change the design?
Aditi, I need to drop off.
Yeah, I'm almost
I'll.
done.
Okay, cool.
Right, so this was the last part. So try out as much as you can. You may fumble a little bit in a few places, that's okay. And the last bit I wanted to show you actually was that these pens are refillable. So I just want to show you, this won't take more than a minute. Using either an X-Acto knife or a cutter, you can remove the top part of your pen, this metal part. So just very gently insert the tip into this gap. Oh, sorry, I managed to chip off a little bit there. And you will dislodge it. And then pull this out very carefully because there's a small filament inside. So you don't want to damage that. And you can use a dropper or a syringe to put a few drops of ink into this chamber, reattach the top of the pen, and keep it upside down for about 24 hours, and then try using it. So
What ink is that?
sorry?
What ink do we use for that?
Right, so I have not used my waterproof ink in this, and I'm a little scared of doing that because if it has even a little exposure to air, I'm afraid that it's going to dry. But at some point, I will use one of my old pens to at least experiment with that. If that works, then great. But till then, you can just use at least fountain pen ink. because then you can draw these regular lines much more easily than filling up a fountain pen. And also, you can expand the life of these pens rather than discarding them as soon as they're done. All right.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, great. So please try the textures and send me questions on the group so that I can help you out. And next month we are doing lettering, but we will be using the same kinds of tools. So I will show you freehand lettering, lettering with a brush, but like a painter's lettering artist techniques, and also introduction to some formal calligraphy scripts. So that's all going to be covered next month. All right.
Thank you so much, Aditi. It was lovely today.
Okay, thanks, Madhushri. Good. Chalo, I'll
See you
see
soon.
you. I'll see you in
Yeah.
class next week.
Yes.
Okay.
Bye.
Okay.
Mm.
Bye.
Okay,
Bye.
bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.